Joining us with more is Louis DeCipio. He's a professor of political science at UC Irvine. Professor, thank you very much for joining us. Firstly, just want to get your reaction to Harris's decision. Why do you think she picked Walz over other candidates, and what does he bring to this race?
Well, I think she picked him because of the chemistry. They work well together. It's sort of a shotgun marriage, but it's been successful so far. It's her hope that he will, the issues that he speaks to and his own experience in Minnesota will help her campaign in a couple of those very important battleground states, Wisconsin, Michigan, maybe Pennsylvania. And if she can win those, she can win the presidency. So the importance is high that he's able to speak to the people in those states. Finally, he brings an economic message that jives with her own, and one that I think she thinks will be a successful set of issues for the Democrats in November.
Professor DeCipio, Harris and Walz just spoke in Pennsylvania, which I'm sure you've watched and heard as well. Harris framing the election not so much as a fight against Trump, but a fight for the future. She spoke about housing, healthcare, paid leave, to name a few. Walz, meantime, saying Trump has no clue about service, no governance, and is a criminal. But I'm more curious about, what the pair reportedly bring to the race, and that's this whole, happy-go-lucky vibe and this joy. I'm curious as to how much you think this is going to be critical in terms of voter turnout and winning the votes eventually.
I think it's critical right now because what Vice President Harris needs to do is bring attention to her campaign. The last month or so of the Biden campaign didn't go very well, and people need to be reinvigorated to pay attention. So that energy, that excitement, these big rallies, very, very important. It's not what's going to win the election, but it will change the conversation about the election. Then beginning with the Democratic convention in 2 weeks and then into the fall, they'll begin to hit home the issues that are important to Democrats and to the two candidates. That's what will turn people out. But right now, getting attention is very important, and keeping the Trump campaign sort of on its back feet. It's not figured out how to respond very effectively.
Yeah, speaking of the Trump campaign, we're already hearing from the Republicans calling Harris-Walz's ticket dangerously liberal. Will this be the prominent line of attack that we'll be hearing over the next 90 days or so? And how do you think this argument will resonate, especially with moderate voters?
If that's all they have, it will not be very successful. Republicans have claimed the Democrats are dangerously liberal for years, and Democrats frequently win elections. The Trump campaign will need another message, and I think former President Trump tried that out last week when he spoke to the Black journalists meeting, where he was trying to otherize Vice President Harris, make her seem different from the American people. If he's able to make that stick, he'll be more successful. But just calling her a liberal isn't enough.
Professor, there's this whole question of time as well. We know that young voters like Walz, after he called the GOP weird. And I think the New York Times spoke to an older voter who was standing in line at the rally. And he basically said, he's a football dad, Walz. He will connect in a lot of ways to the everyday guy. So the sentiment seems spot on, but is there enough time? Because we know Walz is still quite unknown at this time.
That's a very important point. I think I saw some survey data today that 90% of the American public know nothing about Governor Walz. So yes, they very quickly need to introduce him to the American people. And the Harris campaign has a plan for that over the next 2 weeks. And then the Democratic convention will be sort of the culminating point for that. But whether he can speak to those different electorates has yet to be proven. There's the hope that he'll speak to, sort of football dads and older white voters, but there isn't a lot of, we don't know yet. This is his first day. He gets a couple weeks to try out, and then we'll know if this was a good decision on Vice President Harris's part or a bad decision. So far, the signs are positive.
Okay, Professor, but Walz has also faced some criticism for his response to COVID, his handling of George Floyd protests as well. I mean, how vulnerable is he on these issues, and how do you expect him to defend himself?
He is any sitting executive, and he's been, governor of Minnesota now for 6 or 7 years, is going to be vulnerable on what he's done. And COVID was a very challenging time in the United States, as it was in the rest of the world. So it created a lot of friends, but it also created a lot of enemies. Minnesota was the epicenter of the George Floyd protests. And Governor Walz was very important in Minnesota's response to those. So he's going to be challenged. But any candidate would be. And the key is how effective he is at responding to those attacks and whether he's able to turn them on his opponents. He's successfully run for office in a very difficult congressional race in Minnesota and then in his gubernatorial race. So we think he has political talents, but we'll see. So far, his opponent, his direct opponent, Senator Vance, has not been very effective at responding to his critics. So perhaps we'll be grading Governor Walz on a little bit of a curve.
Josh Shapiro lost out, we know that, but still gave a rousing and energizing opening speech at the rally, talking about not going back, calling Vance a weirdo. I'm wondering if you see this as a missed opportunity, or is he actually going to be more useful for the Democrats by staying governor of Pennsylvania?
Well, that's an important point. And I think that was one of the things that worked against Senator Kelly, the Arizona senator, who was also in competition. The concern was that if he was put on the ticket and then they won, it would be very hard to hold on to that Senate seat. As I say, I think it's really too early to judge whether Walz was a better pick than Shapiro or Shapiro was a better pick than Kelly. The proof will be in the pudding, and that pudding will be over the next few weeks as Governor Walz introduces himself to the American people, and the Republican attack machine, which is undoubtedly gearing up everything wrong that Governor Walz has done in his career, will begin talking about some of those issues. There's no way to tell with a candidate from outside the sort of mainstream of Washington, and that certainly describes Walz or Shapiro or, to be honest, Kelly, who's only been in office for a couple of years.
Okay, going to be an interesting and intense 90 days ahead. Professor, thank you so much for your time this morning. Les DiCipio is Professor of Political Science at UC Irvine.